Welcome, one and all, back to the Viper's Nest. I do apologize that my uploads have been a little bit sporadic. I've just been very busy, but I wanted to make a video today, and so that's what I'm doing. I'm not going to be talking about, I am going to be talking about lore, but probably not anything like super important. This is just a video so I can make a video and actually have something new go up on the channel and not feel like I'm being a lazy bum. But anyway, so today I guess we're talking about lore of myself, or more specifically lore about my favorite superhero, Superman. So a lot of people nowadays are real down on people who say Superman is their favorite superhero. Like, I do understand it's a very vanilla choice, I suppose. Or it's down to, like, people are like, oh, you only pick Superman, so that way you can always win the argument of who would win in a fight between two favorite superheroes or whatever. Which is a fair criticism, I get it. But here's the thing. Superman is not my favorite superhero because he's unbeatable. Superman is actually my favorite superhero because he lost. And I'm going to take you on the journey that brought me to that conclusion. So we're going to go way back to the year 1994. So back in 94, where I live in Alaska, we had a Kmart, which those are still things, right? Those still exist down in the lower 48? Maybe. I don't know. That's not important to today's video, but so, back in 1994, times were very different. Like, parents allowed their kids to wander around unsupervised in stores and weren't worried about, like, them getting snatched off the street. Very different times. So, the pattern I had whenever I went to Kmart, when I went to go grocery shopping with my parents, was I would take my allowance and I would go find a comic book. Because back in 1994, you could still get comic books in stores like Kmart and Fred Meyer's and stuff. So I would go find a comic book, I would go pay for my comic book, and then I would walk over to the Little Caesars that we had in the Kmart, and I would feast upon breadsticks whilst reading my new comic book until my parents were done shopping. So it was in 1994. I don't remember the exact date, which shame on me, but I do remember it was in the summer. So in this summer of 1994, I found the Death of Superman comic book. And it was like the big Uber collector, well, not really collector's edition, but like the big like Uber edition with the 4-page fold out of the picture of like Superman lying dead in the street and, Lois Lane crying over him. So I purchased this comic book and I read this comic book and let me change up the thing on the screen here real quick because this other guy here, oh, look at that, I'm cutting off my avatar. That's fine. This other guy, Doomsday, obviously very important to the story. We'll get to him in a second. But anyway, I read this comic book, and I think, like, my 5-year-old self went into fucking shock at Superman dying, which, I mean, of course, now we know he actually didn't die, but at the time, that was not known. Or it might have been because the comic had been out for a year at that point, but I was 5 years old. I didn't know that shit. So, I was in shock that Superman not only had lost, but had died. Because, Superman, hitting a stumbling block every now and then, that's not really, that wasn't unusual. That was just, if Superman didn't, then Superman would be incredibly boring. So, he stumbled, but he never really got beaten. And even if he did get, quote-unquote, defeated, he usually got up and fixed that by the next issue. So, anyway, in this comic book, Superman had died, and it was this creature, Doomsday, that had killed him, which was another shocker to me, because I didn't know who Doomsday was. Really, until the Death of Superman comic line, nobody knew who Doomsday was. He was just this guy that came out of nowhere and wrecked Superman. So, it wasn't Lex Luthor that took Superman down. It wasn't Brainiac. It wasn't Darkseid. It was just this guy that just came out of freaking nowhere and, took down the greatest hero in comics history, which blew my little 5-year-old mind. I could not freaking believe it. The fact that Superman had been beaten, let alone killed, was like, could not process. I was in shock for like probably a good day afterwards, and then I had to try to explain to my dad, who was not really into comic books slash, like, I don't know, entertainment. Okay, that's a lie. He liked entertainment. He was not into comic books and superheroes. He didn't have time for that stuff. He was always working, and, you know, the most entertainment he usually got was, like, putting on a movie to fall asleep to. So I had to try to explain to my dad, like, why I was upset that this, you know, fictional character had supposedly died. And to his credit, he did his best to empathize with me and, you know, explain that, you know, people die. It happens. But eventually, as time went on, the shock wore off. Of course, it was revealed that neither Superman nor Doomsday were actually dead, and everything was fine after that. But this particular comic run affected me for years, decades even. I mean, it still has an effect upon me to this day. So, here's why. Everybody knows that, like, Superman is one of, if not the most powerful being in comic books. That's pretty much an accepted fact at this point. So, it comes down to that old saying where the more power you have, the more afraid you are to lose it. And Superman has all the powers. So a lot of times, not all, but a lot of times in comic books, when a hero is called upon to, like, you know, make the ultimate sacrifice and lay down their life or whatever, it's oftentimes because they don't have a choice. It's going to happen one way or another, and they can choose to either go quietly or go down swinging, as Dean Winchester would say. But a lot of those heroes, like I said, those were the only options in that time. When Doomsday came to Metropolis and Superman started, like, really understanding the fact that he might actually lose, if not die, during this fight, Superman has all the power. Superman very easily could have just left, just, like, pieced on out of there. But he didn't. In fact, the thought never crossed his mind. Like, he very easily could have just been like, all right, I don't want to die here. I'm just going to fly off and, I don't know, find another planet that orbits a yellow sun and start a new life there. But, you know, he didn't. Like I said, that thought never even crossed Superman's mind. So he went after Doomsday with literally everything he had. In Superman's own words, he was hitting Doomsday with punches that Superman had never hit anyone with ever, at least up until that point anyway. Like, Superman well and truly stopped holding back in this fight, but Doomsday still just kept on coming. And it culminated with them, quote-unquote, beating each other to death, although the truth is that it was more like they just kind of beat each other into a healing coma. But the fact was that, you know, Superman, of all people, who had the chance to just leave, to disengage from the fight, to let it happen, escape any way he could, didn't. And instead, he chose to lay down his life for the people of Metropolis and the people of Earth at large. The thought of retreating from this fight, like I said, never even crossed Superman's mind. That's, I guess, what a pure, like, determined, decent being Superman is. And it's really that fact that Superman chose to make the ultimate sacrifice, even though he had literal, infinite, almost, escape options, chose to stick it out and go down in the end anyway. And that made me really freaking admire Superman over the years, because, like, put me in that situation. If I had Superman's power, I guess I am a family man now. My priorities have shifted over the years, but, you know, the thought of retreat and leaving and preserving my own life would still cross my mind. I'm man enough to admit that. Like, I would think about it in that situation. Like, I would give honest consideration to just getting the hell out of this fight and living to fight another day. Superman didn't. Superman really stuck it out. So the other thing that really affected me about this comic line, other than Superman being such a honest, heroic, decent person, was that over the years, I also came to really admire the guy who killed him, Doomsday. So Doomsday is my favorite villain, right next to Superman being my favorite hero, also because of this particular comic line and the way it's affected me over the years. So, a lot of people say Doomsday is completely mindless, and there's a lot of, like, fiction that portrays him as being completely mindless. That's not actually true. There is a mind in there somewhere. It's not much of one, but there is. Oh, my son's crying. All right, I'm gonna have to try to wrap this up in the next couple of minutes. He sounds upset that he just woke up from his nap. Anyway, so Doomsday is not completely mindless, but he's also, like, he's not a complicated character. His backstory is kind of complicated. If you really wanted to boil it down, he's basically like a genetically engineered killing machine from Krypton's ancient past. We're not going to go into that. But, like, there's a brain in there. And all Doomsday really wants to do is just rage and fight and destroy anything and everything in his path. And that's really about it. That's what Doomsday does. And his particular superpower, it kind of was tailor-made to take down the Superman of the time. So basically, whatever you do to Doomsday, he adapts to it. So, like, when Superman hits him with his heat vision, it'll burn Doomsday, but then Doomsday will heal, and then the heat vision won't work on him again. He just adapts very, very fast, which is why Superman kept having to hit him harder and harder and harder to the point where he just overwhelmed Doomsday's adaptive ability. But whereas Superman didn't back down in this fight, neither did Doomsday, which is saying something because Doomsday completely, like, wrecked the Justice League at the time. He tore through them like freaking tissue paper and, went on to proceed to, quote-unquote, kill Superman, which is no small feat. But over the years, I came to think, I'm like, man, just think about, like, the depths of, like, rage and hatred and, like, just sheer fucking bullheaded determination Doomsday would have had to actually take down Superman. And that right there is, I gotta tell you, man, that is something to be, like, admired and aspire to. Like, I wish I could be as fucking determined as both Superman and Doomsday as they were in this particular comic run. It's honestly freaking incredible. It's hands down my favorite comic run of, like, all time, at least up until this point. Like, I don't know, maybe something will come someday that will knock this particular piece of fiction off its throne, but I don't see that happening. So, it is kind of hard to find, like, the actual comic of this, or at least it used to be. It might be on Comixology now. I highly recommend you find this particular comic run. Also, the one that comes after it, Reign of the Supermen, is also really freaking good. If it's not on Comixology, I know there's a novelized version. I have both the hardback and paperback version of it because I like to collect things and I also lose things, so I have two of them. You can also find it in animated form. There's a movie called Superman Doomsday. I don't recommend it. That one's not great. But there is another work of film, a two-part, that I know you can get on Amazon Prime, literally called The Death of Superman and Reign of the Supermen. They do change up the events of it a little bit, but they stick pretty close to the core story of the comic line. Superman versus Doomsday, the finish of that, and then the four guys that show up to temporarily replace Superman afterwards, and everything that goes down with him. It's a really freaking good comic line. But I do want to talk about, like, specifically one thing that was in the comic and the novelization that never made it into, like, the movies or anything, which I thought was really cool. So, in the middle of this whole thing, but technically between Death of Superman and Reign of the Superman, there was a short comic line called Funeral for a Friend, which was basically the world essentially, dealing with and coming to terms that their greatest hero, Superman, was dead, quote unquote. You guys understand what I'm talking about now. I don't have to keep doing that. But anyway, it was all these different heroes, like, and people, like, Clark Kent's parents, Lois Lane, the Justice League, and a whole bunch of other people whose Superman had affected their lives in some way or another, coming to terms with the fact that Superman was dead. So they were having a huge funeral in Metropolis where they were laying Superman to rest in like Metropolis Central Park or wherever the hell they ended up putting him in the ground. I don't quite remember. But like everyone showed up. Like the Justice League showed up, a few villains showed up. But one of the most important ones to me, which affected me like the deepest that showed up, was actually Batman. So in the animated movie, Batman was like standing with the Justice League as they buried Superman. But in the actual funeral for a friend, Batman was like he was doing his Batman thing. He was sticking to the shadows. So a bunch of like world leaders had showed up to Superman's funeral because Superman had saved the world on multiple occasions. Everyone was coming to pay their respects, and there was one guy who had an explosive vest on, was gonna run up on one of these world leaders and self-detonate because it was the 90s. That was a big thing that was happening in the world. Big thing still happens, but much more in the spotlight, I guess, as it were. So Batman takes this guy down, drags him up on a rooftop, steals his explosive vest, and this is normally where Batman would beat the piss out of this guy and leave him hanging somewhere as a message to everybody else. But after he disarmed the guy, he stopped and he spoke to the guy and said, "All right, look, normally this is where I would hurt you really bad, leave you out as a message to all the other villains, but just once, just for today, I'm going to do things the way Superman would want me to." So then he tells the guy that he's going to put him back on the street. That guy is going to go find the nearest police officer, and he's going to turn himself in, or Batman is going to come back for him. And that's exactly what happened. He let the guy go, and the guy was like, "Oh crap, I just ran afoul of freaking Batman, and he gave me a chance. I'm going to go fucking turn myself in." And I thought Batman being Batman is, you could make the argument that he's one for ostentation. He's got a Batmobile, he's got a Batplane, he's got Bat everything. But, earlier on, in the 90s or something, Batman was at least I felt was a lot less prone to symbolism. So he wouldn't have been the type of Batman to walk openly in the light and be at the forefront of Superman's funeral procession. He was the guy who would have been hanging back in the shadows and be well, what's the best way that I personally can honor Superman? And then obviously coming to the conclusion that, well, maybe on this particular day, I'll do things the way Superman would want me to do things. And then he did. And I'm not the biggest Bat fan, but that one really got me right in the feels. The fact that as much as they're different, deep down, Batman and Supes, they were fucking buddies. They disagreed with each other a lot, but they did have an incredible amount of respect for each other. Just all around, the whole Death and Return of Superman comic line is my absolute favorite. Superman is my favorite superhero. Doomsday is my favorite supervillain. It's as damn close to perfect a comic line, I think, that anyone could ever possibly have. And I think it's going to remain that way because it's going to take something truly fucking 10 out of 10, absolutely amazing, perfect to dislodge that from the top of my list. But anyway, that is why Superman is my favorite superhero and why Doomsday is my favorite supervillain. It's an uncomplicated storyline of two of the most powerful beings in the universe being determined enough that they actually manage to, again, kill one another. It's simple, it's easy to understand, it's truly fucking epic. Go find it and read it or watch it any way you can, because it is truly one of the fucking greats. Anyway, that's going to be all for me. Thank you for watching/listening. A like and a subscribe would be appreciated. See you on the next episode, and as always, have yourself a wonderful day.